you very much, Sasha, and all the organizers for having us. Although this is a bit wrong to say, because Robert Schumann is apparently one of the organizers, but he's very sorry not to be here in person because, as you heard before, he had application going. Hopefully he gets it. Anyway, so I will be presenting on behalf of Robert and also Rupert Gebhard, whom you see here in the picture, who's the leader of the project for the Bavarian State Collection of Archaeological Finds. And the title will explain itself in a minute. I can already say that we are just about to change because Rena was just giving this fantastic talk with not very much material evidence, but a lot of information about mythology, and we will have just the opposite. So we will see now a lot of finds, but we don't know anything about what this was, who this person was. So it is a project which is going on for some time, but which was only recently, this year in fact, funded. So we can now do more things which we couldn't do before. It has been financed by the Bavarian State Collection. And as you see from the project title, microstratigraphy, detailed examination, and so forth, this project could not or can't take place without the marvelous work of many, many people in the restoration department of the State Collection in Munich, because they're really the ones who brought everything to light I will be talking about. It's also an interdisciplinary project, so with many people involved. But Robert Schumann and I are just now working on the archaeological evidence. Now, where are we here? Otzing is a village in Lower Bavaria, close to Straubing and Deggendorf, near the Danube. And I think you can see Paris just at the very end. So you see the distance between where we are here in Saint-Germain and Otzing, just to give you an idea. We are in southern Bavaria. And the find I will be talking about was discovered in 2010. It was a rescue excavation when a sports ground was developed in this area here marked on the right. And what came to light and was excavated by the district archaeology and in Deggendorf, Karl Schmotz was the colleague who did it, was this. It was a totally plowed out rest of a Iron Age, this Hallstatt period cemetery. 3 former barrows survived. You can see this by the the ditches around, and there were 2 additional flat graves which were not encircled by a ditch. And this one grave I won't be talking about. This is one of the 3 barrows which produced an Iron Age burial, but the main focus now lies in this one. It comes from a barrow of 19 meters in diameter with a burial chamber of 3.8 by 3.8 meters across. And what was interesting, after it was meticulously excavated, you see already the pots here on the east of the chamber were a lot of metal finds. And this was then the time when the state collection was called in, and a block was formed, which was then transported to the laboratory, and there it was excavated ever since. I'm just, can you see the mouse here? No, sorry, I have to go back. There's no, can you see the mouse? No. Anyway, so in where the arrow is, you see this was part of the burial chamber, but there were no finds. It's a void. But this will be important because we will be talking about wagon burial, ? I believe it was a wagon burial, but no evidence of any tires survived. But it could have been that they were entirely made of wood and may have been placed at this western part of the chamber, and we don't have any traces of them. But let's move into things. Here we see the blocks which were then excavated during the last years in the state collection. And the main focus also on the project is this microstratigraphy, because a formerly 1.5, we don't know, high burial chamber was actually collapsed, and it's only a few centimeters really where all the finds have been compressed. So this is what makes it really difficult to assess what's in there. And so the first part were X-rays taken with the help of colleagues from Baden-Württemberg who helped us with that. And here to my left, you see the state of condition before the excavation took place. Now let's look at the finds, and you can already see in the X-rays that it's full of information and full of objects, which can, I hope, still be seen. Now, this is the situation now. It is an inhumation grave of a young man who died between 20 and 30 years of age. And as you see from the information on the slide, it was an exceptionally richly equipped burial inhumation. And you can see a lot of green on the slide here to my left. And indeed, everything you see in green are little pieces of bronze. And what you also can see, I will zoom in the middle, is that the body was lying on top of these various objects. Now that's another view. And to give you an idea what this is or was all about, we just have to, I hope this works now. Why it doesn't? Oh yeah, now it is. I won't bore you with everything, but we just zoom into different stages of the excavation in the laboratory. And here you can see it's only a few centimeters which were preserved. We jump a little bit. Okay. And here we zoom into more, now 15. And you can already see it's a yoke. Here, this is skull, the spine, and a backrest of the deceased. Okay. And here are details of what appears to be a yoke. But I will talk about this now in detail, just to give you an idea and a close-up how, because this is also part of the project, that every step of restoration is meticulously recorded, and we thank this 3D animation to these people. So now continue with the presentation. Okay. Right, let's zoom through the items we found. There's a pottery set of over 20 vessels of different types, and I think we mentioned this in the morning, that this is one thing which constitutes early Iron Age elite burials in the Hallstatt culture, that you have a set of, for exotic drinks, of banquets, but not only for the deceased, but for guests in participating symbolically, being as a show in the for the community of the living, and at the stage when the barrier was actually built, or, as I believe, also for, like in Hochdorf, for an eternal symposium in another world or afterlife. Now, among these vessel sets, which are I won't focus about, this is also Robert's part, you see a green shimmering metal cup. It's a bronze cup, which is certain, it's very likely an Italian import with an omphalos, and it was wrapped in bast fiber. But more interestingly was the content, because inside we found seeds of Spanish broom, Spatium juncteum in Latin. And this is a plant, a species of broom, which only grows in the Mediterranean area. So at that time, no way in Bavaria. So it must have been an import from the south. And interestingly also, this has some therapeutical qualities. It's a poisonous plant, but it was used in antiquity against rheumatism and gout, but has also hallucinogenic effects. Now, from an archaeological point of view, it's interesting because in the area of Lower Bavaria, so far, no, well, except one find I will show in a minute, no precious metal finds typical for the Hallstatt period have been found yet. I think also, or we think, that this is a taphonomic problem because Lower Bavaria has the most fertile soil in the whole of Bavaria. It's heavily plowed. And so burial mounds hardly survive anyway. You just see them in aerial photography, or in this case, by chance. Now, the pottery set, just a selection of finds Robert has selected here, is very much in line with the local tradition. This is the normal kind of types and decoration you would find around the Danube area in southern Bavaria, some also north of the Danube. And so it's what we would call local and medium range level of communication. And if you assume that the pottery, it's of course handmade, was made by women locally, so as Ursula Broseder showed some years ago, the distribution of pottery patterns is totally different than the distribution to metal objects. So we have two diverging spheres of communication and exchange, and this is here, if we assume this, the female sphere, and it's different than the male sphere. But here's one example Robert put on a map of one particular type fossil for the Bavarian or Southern Central European Iron Age, these plates with a carnate profile. But one pot, the little one in the middle, you see the chevron design. Now, this actually shows that it's an elite burial, but the same type and pattern you also find across social boundaries. In this case, in a so-called small cremation burial in the Munich district. They were interpreted as the tombs of, as I said, lower ranks of society. It could be that they're also the more traditional members of society practicing cremation throughout the Iron Age. In this case, in this little cemetery, it was also maybe gendered because in Grünwald, mainly women and children were buried. But anyway, so a shared idea of how this particular pot should look like. Now, elites and the topic of the conference. Now, why this was labeled an ostentatious burial or an elite burial, and that's the good preservation of organic finds thanks to the objects you can see here. And they are forming parts of a yoke, a harness for a wagon, and a bier, and also leather bands. And we will zoom into this. Now, as the restaurators in their meticulous work have found out, we see, as I said before, the whole thing collapsed and is very compressed in a few centimeters. But you can hopefully see that we have in red, it's one part of the yoke which was broken in the middle. And then we see, I do it like this, and then we see rails, wooden rails, which only survive because of the nails and rivets with bronze, because the poisonous copper oxide actually kills the germs. So the organic material was preserved. And in yellow, we see leather straps, which is very rare to find. And if we zoom into the yoke part, we have hundreds and hundreds of bronze studs, which were actually put inside the wooden frame. Here we are. It's a close-up where you see the same situation. And at the side of the bier, we have the second half of the yoke, which was probably hung up at the wall of the chamber. And then when it collapsed, it was, came to rest at a different place. Now, in the reconstruction, it looks like this. And some of you, like Martin Treffny, probably already says, okay, I know this, because the best parallels for this construction of a wooden yoke with hundreds and hundreds of bronze decorations is indeed the in Bohemia, in the so-called Bülani group, where we have quite a few of these burials. You see the old publication by Dvořák from the 1930s, where you can see on four-wheeled wagons the deceased, like in Otzing, facing north. The body is put on the four-wheeled wagon, and in the south, so to say, you have the ornamented yoke, and all the circles are representing pottery ensembles as well. So here's the distribution of the Bülani group, and if you look at the finds of those elite burials of the Bohemian Bülani group, you have the same kind of construction. You have these yokes studded with all kinds of bronze ornamentation. I just show you here two examples from Chladinin and from Planini, and a closer zoom. Those square rivets, but they are also found in different areas. In this one, it's the Frankfurt Stadtwald Eichlehen in Hesse, and it's also an elite burial of the late Hallstatt period, which was put, interestingly enough, in a much older, in fact, two older barrows. The uppermost part is the Iron Age burial, so there's clearly some deliberate allusion to ancestors, very likely never known to the guy who was buried inside. And you can see here to the right also two pieces, bits and side pieces for the harness, and a yoke. In the reconstruction, you can see it's the same kind of square studs as in Otzing or in the Bülani examples. He was a sword bearer, a late Hallstatt type. He had also different equipments of so-called toilet equipment I will be showing in a minute. And it's the grave with the largest set of Italian imported vessels in the late early Hallstatt period. You can see the sfiala and situla, este type situla, and bronze basins. So this was quite a very important man. Here again, the comparison between Stadtwald, Frankfurt Stadtwald and Otzing. But there are other yoke finds which haven't been published that nicely, or you can see a different type here of Riedenburg Heidhof, also in Bavaria. And if you map all the finds of yokes studded with bronze bits, you see a map which I think, referring to Sasha's talk in the morning, is not a conclusive one, because this is just an area where the people chose to have inhumations with the paraphernalia of status. So we have these things, but I'm sure if we would look to the Low Countries, we would find similar things. So this map is just a map of a burial rite, not as much as it seems to be of an artifact type. So we have to be aware what layers we see of interpretation. But this is not my main point. The main point is, well, of course, you can see a close communication between what is now present-day Bavaria and what is now present-day Bohemia. So these communities, obviously, across the geographical border of the Bavarian and Bohemian forest, you see this little mountain range, obviously communicated. But the point I was wanting to stress here for the later interpretation is the Mitterkirchen Barrow 10 grave 1 we hear hopefully tomorrow by Jutta Leskova, because this burial is the one of a woman. Now, the second part is the leather objects. I mean, the yokes are more frequent, but leather, as you may imagine, is more difficult to find. And in Otzing, we actually have, even in the outline, leather bands which were attached to the bier originally. So that's also in Planini. There is some idea on some other sites I was showing in Bohemia. And one example from Geisheim in Franconia, an old excavation of the early 20th century. but you may already see that the design, the pattern is so similar of the Geisheim example and the reconstruction of the Otzing band, and also, as we will see in a minute, of other examples, so that we can assume that there were the same workshops, or at least workshops working in the same tradition as the people who worked with the yokes and the people who did woodworking then, of course, but also leatherworking. And they had an idea of patterns, how it should look like over long distances. And here's the evidence of, again, of a Bohemian example in the Dischina Tumulus II burial near Pilsen. And you already see in the pictures, it's very much, very similar to the Otzing example. And there's one in Pullach in Munich. Again, in a 19th century excavation, so this might hint at even more examples that this existed. I will come back to that later. Now, the harness and tag is very much in line of what you would expect in the Hallstatt Sea period all across Europe. It's the ubiquitous rain knobs, and I won't discuss them in detail. I've done that before in other papers, so just believe me, I think they're the most widespread items. And we have 2 iron bits, and with the rain rings at the bottom, I think we've seen that also from the Low Countries in Slabruch it is, I think, and in, no, sorry, you have to help me. Okay, so anyway, so this would be, again, something you could find in Slovenia or in Bavaria or even in the Low Countries. Now, what is interesting, though, if you may be remembering the outlines of this, of the chambers of the Bülani group, so all the tag and bits and side pieces and yokes were put at the very end of the chamber, so we can actually assume a whole wagon with a pole and the 4 wheels, whereas in Otzing, the harness was put on the chest of the deceased. Now, this leads to questions. Here's another reconstruction. I'm just showing this in another example from Groß Albstadt, again in Franconia, the same set of horse gear tag, but again, the deceased was lying on this 4-wheeled wagon, whereas all the horse gear was outside. So we can actually assume it was a 4-wheeled wagon. Now in Otzing, another thing is strange, because the man was lying on this, what we think is a bier or a piece of furniture, with his legs over the backrest, which had collapsed, and the feet were not found. I think this may have been in the course of the excavation, so they're maybe lost because of, the rescue situation. But anyway, this strange position raises the question whether we are dealing with a 4-wheeled wagon or maybe with something else. Now let's look at this a little bit in detail. The backrest of this piece of furniture, collapsed, is very much, or can be very well compared with the so-called Jochschnallen Christopher Pear and others have dealt with, which are actually not belonging to the yoke, but to the wagon boxes, as he himself says. So we have some examples here. Also some symbolic items dangling from the bier. And this, so to be sure that we are doing the right things, everything is GIS recorded, all the different parts of the organic material. You see a chart with the different kinds of wood, and the same thing exists for textiles, which will be dealt with by Carina Grömer. Now here again, a comparison of the already mentioned Geisheim burial, old find. And what is interesting is you see to the left, the excavator, not knowing what, I mean, he wasn't a trained archaeologist in the 1900s, but he depicted this, this waveline furniture piece. And that's the best evidence for the Otzing burial. Also, the leather bands, even wooden rails for a buyer, probably. And yeah, so this is all these pieces and bits which would belong to a wagon box or box fittings, as in this distribution by Chris Pear. Now, if we look at the area or the closest comparison of the Otzing find is the burial of a woman in Niedererlbach, also an elite burial. You just have to think it's up where the north is pointing actually south. So she lies in the same direction, but she is also on a four-wheeled wagon, clearly. The yoke is above her head. She has the same set of a pottery. Inside one of the pots was a bowl, like in Otzing, Italian import, meat offerings, and what you would expect. Now, this even makes the argument stronger that in Otzing we're not dealing with a four-wheeled wagon, even if we say that wheels may have been dismantled and may have been put at the eastern part of the burial chamber. Now, the reason why I'm suggesting this is in Mitterkirchen, we will hear tomorrow. It's a female burial, as I said, and the lady was also put on a bier, which was reconstructed some time ago, like this. Now, I think they're different reconstructions. But why I'm showing this also this morning, by Laurent Olivier, we saw the burial of Diaville. And what is interesting here in the lower image is that you could actually detach a bier or a furniture from the wagon box itself. So we can assume that in Otzing, a similar thing must have happened, that the deceased was carried to the grave, probably on a wagon, maybe on a two-wheeled wagon, but then the bier was actually detached and put in the grave. Now, two-wheeled wagons, what evidence do we have? So far, we are always thinking that chariots or carpentum in Latin was only used in the early Latin R period, as we have heard in this marvelous talk by Nico Reumans this morning. But if we look closer, I think there's even in north of the Alps in the Hallstatt C period, or maybe late Hallstatt C D1, I will come to that in a second, evidence for two-wheeled wagons. In Etruria and further to the south in Italy, they were obviously in use. You see two prominent examples for wagons, procession wagons with a stool or something on top. And Otzing may have been something like this because the backrest is quite prominent here. And in recent reconstruction of the famous Camorta female burial, Hallstatt D3, by Bruno Schom, even there they now reconstruct one part of this burial with this waved backrest like in Otzing, although Otzing is a lot older. Why is it older? Well, the pottery, of course, would be indicative for the Hallstatt C or developed Hallstatt C1, C2 period. But the weapon set of the deceased, consisting of, as you can see in the X-ray, a short sword, dagger, and two spearheads. Now, certainly points to a Hallstatt D1 date. Those antenna short swords or daggers are type fossil for the transition of the Hallstatt C2 D1 period, as Susanne Sievers has pointed out in her work some time ago. And again, there's indications that this is an import from Italy because the sheath, which was made of organic material but covered with bronze, sheath of bronze, that's a type you find in Italy. So that's something which would point again to the east. And it's also interesting that the weapons were all covered in textile. Okay, here we are. This is the map of Susanne Sievers of the 1970s. And we've seen another example today of an antenna-hilt dagger. So this map has to be made anew. But anyway, so this is interesting because it shows, and also I the couple burial of Hallstatt D1, so-called elite burial of in Baden-Württemberg. Here, this is clearly dated to Hallstatt D1, and the combination of weapons is the same, a dagger and 2 spears. So also from the combination of, and therefore fighting techniques, the Otzing man is progressive in his age, because if we look at the horse gear, the tag, the pottery, and of course the yoke and everything, this is very much Hallstatt C typologically, but the dagger and the weapon combination is not. It's not. So how do we deal with that? And I think we are very much too much focused on typology, and also the verdict of Georg Kossak, who actually invented this typology. And I will, in the end of the talk, will tell you why. Of course, it's Hallstatt C. We can imagine that it was, like Laurent Olivier said in his talk, that these were objects which have been in use for a longer period of time. But I would rather argue that they were produced at the time when the person died, but that we have to reckon that we have more long-standing traditions of certain prestigious items which may have outlasted our very narrow idea of chronology, also a chronology which is based on pottery types. And as I said in the beginning, pottery made by women must not follow the same sequences as metal objects. Now, very quickly, time's running out. He had also on his chest, he had a set of what we call toilette items for personal hygiene. So the warrior's beauty was mentioned here. So nail clippers, ear spoons, and what you need to be okay, tweezers. And this was also wrapped in textiles, as you can say, with a wheel-thrown amber bead, which has a distribution, as you can see. But also this beauty set for a male person belongs to the proper equipment, as in the Stadtwald area burial, or as Leif Hansen in his dissertation has shown in the Hochdorf burial, which is, as we know, at least 2 periods later than the Otzing, many generations later, but the same combination. And what is interesting, which has not been looked at in detail, is this leather band in the Hochdorf burial here on Leif's image, which still shows a pattern which slightly resembles the leather work of the Otzing burial. Now, and I'm coming to the conclusion, and I think this is a most vital part of this burial. It looks like this, and it's, well, what is this? Heavily corroded objects, which were found next to the head of the deceased, next to an antler hammer, you see here, and 3 whetstones of different materials. So also maybe symbolic 3. This is something which means a lot. But maybe in a bag, a set of tools. And as the X-ray shows, they're very interesting tools. There's a tweezer, an awl, an awl, and some other objects which were then created by Stefan Gussmann, one of the restaurators. He spent a lot of work, and we consulted metals, a smith who had experience with tools. And you can see the replicas here. We have I'm now missing the word for metalworking, this, Bettina, Pfeile, what would that be? File, okay, good. Thank you. And then we have punches and everything, but also this tweezer thing. And in the middle, an object which is hollow. And as you see on the left, it's the same dimensions as the end buttons of the yoke, and you can see also the turns where someone actually tried to do that. And all the other tools are very useful for leather working, and those tweezers to maybe insert the rivets in the leather or in the yoke. So why? And this is in his grave. Now this leads us to the conclusion that this man was not only a member of the elite, which he certainly was. He was also a warrior, also given, but he was also a craftsperson. And this is, I think, of some significance for the interpretation of, let's go one back, interpretation of these burials of the Halshazi period, also late Urnfi period. My husband, Louis Nebelsick, some time ago, I think 20 years ago, he wrote a paper of the combination of elite burials of the late Bronze Age, Urnfi period, and early Halshat period, where we find the combination between tools and weapons, and that this is quite a common pattern or an image, a role, how a deceased person is portrayed in the grave. And now Otzing very well fits into this pattern. If we want to call him a ruler, be it over a rural community or a greater network of or different lineages of people, anyway, he was certainly part of a network of craftspersons, including highly trained specialists who were working on an elite level, harness makers, yoke makers, cartwrights, etc. As I had shown in the beginning, the yokes in Stadtwald, Bülani group, and Otzing are so similar that that we have to assume that there was a common knowledge, and because this distribution indicates that we can assume that there were mobile craftspeople around. Very similar patterns of the ornamentation of the yoke, as well as the decoration of the leather bands, and that's, I think, is important on the wagon box or bier, indicate that this intense communication existed. You can argue that leather bands can be traded, but a yoke, I think, it's difficult. Why shouldn't you make it at the spot? So temporary workshops of mobile, highly specialized people, that would be one idea. But then we may ask, who were these craftspeople? Certainly, they were highly skilled specialists. In the Otzing example, it hints, and I think that's also important, at the possibility that the deceased ruler himself was able to produce parts of his funeral equipment. Whether he did it in life or whether this was just staged by his community in the act of burying him remains a question. But certainly the symbolic sphere was addressed as a double role of the warrior and the craftsperson, which also in folklore later is quite a common image. Now, concerning the theory of an interconnected male elite, which was put forward some time ago by Georg Kossak, a caste of warriors who communicated transgressing regional borders, maybe. But I think that close and long-distance contacts and exchange networks clearly existed. No other evidence, that's for sure. In particular between the Bülani group in Bohemia, Bavarian elites, Stadtwald, and so forth, and along the Danube, Mitterkirchen. But the Mitterkirchen evidence, and also in a part the Niedererbach burial show, that this was a whole community, not only men, like this Kriegerbünde, or what was the warrior bands, which was discussed also in the last century, but it was clearly a community of both men and women, of course more men than women, but women were present. And therefore, we would argue that we have not this model of a very male-oriented trans-regional upper class of also maybe religiously connected men, but instead, I would presume that we have, next to this craftsperson exchange network, a network of elite families who entertained wide-ranging kinship networks with families across the Alps in Etruria. This is very clear that there have been close contacts to northern Italy and across the Bohemian, Bavarian, Bohemian forest geographic border, or further to the west. yeah, so there's research going on. So it was just some information, and I thank you for your patience and listening.